This message comes from Sony Pictures Classics, presenting The Penguin Lessons, a new comedy starring Steve Coogan as a teacher whose life is upended after he rescues a penguin from an oil-slicked beach. Starts March 28th, only in theaters.
What's good? You're listening to Code Switch from NPR. I'm Gene Demby.
And I'm B.A. Parker.
Parker, I want to take you back to a moment in one of Trump's State of the Union speeches from his first term.
Okay.
In the last 2 years, our brave ICE officers made 266,000 arrests.
And then Trump does that thing that presidents do in these speeches, where they shout out regular Americans in the audience to make a point about how their policies are good, actually.
We are joined tonight by one of those law enforcement heroes, ICE Special Agent Elvin Hernandez.
Trump goes on to make the point that Elvin and his family legally immigrated to the U.S. from the Dominican Republic, and then he talks about the importance of what he calls legal immigrants in the United States.
Legal immigrants enrich our nation and strengthen our society in countless ways.
Fast forward to earlier this month, Parker, and near the Columbia University campus, and this is according to a court filing, an ICE agent that identified himself as Elvin Hernandez is one of the agents there to arrest a recent Columbia graduate named Mahmoud Khalil. Mahmoud and his very pregnant wife are coming home from an iftar dinner.
Yeah, because it's Ramadan.
Yeah, because it's Ramadan. And as they got to their apartment, the agents are there and Mahmoud Khalil is handcuffed. His wife actually recorded that moment on her phone.
What? You're going to be under arrest. So turn around.
Okay,
Stop
let's
resisting.
not.
Stop resisting.
Okay, he's not resisting. He's giving me his phone, okay? He's not, I understand, he's not resisting.
Put your arm
Like,
Don't worry about it. You're going to have to come with us. Don't worry about it.
I'm coming with you, don't worry. No one's resisting, no one's getting worked up.
you guys really don't need to be doing all of that.
It's fine.
حبيبي كيف بدي اتصل فيك؟
Take Amy. Call Amy. She'll be
Okay.
fine.
Hi, Amy. Yeah, they just handcuffed him and took him. I don't know what to do.
Mahmoud Khalil's family is Palestinian. They lived in Syria, then they fled Syria, and eventually he came to the U.S. to go to Columbia. He got his green card, and while he was at Columbia, he became a very public face of the protests on campus in support of Palestinians last year after Israel's bombardment of Gaza following the October 7th, 2023 attacks.
So full transparency, I'm a graduate of Columbia, and it just so happens that I was at an alumni event on the very first day of the protests in 2024. And so I took out my recorder, and that's the tape that you're hearing right now. And those protests and the encampment from those demonstrators put Columbia at kind of the epicenter of all these national conversations, right? About the war on Gaza and protesting Israel, and how many people saw protesting Israel as anti-Semitic.
Justice! Mahmoud Khalil has been described as the go-between for the protesters on campus and the university's administrators. So apparently he was negotiating on behalf of students and pushing for the university to divest from Israel. So after his arrest, when his wife was trying to find him at federal detention centers nearby, she couldn't. And it wasn't until later that the federal government told his wife and his lawyers where Mahmoud Khalil was being held, in a detention center in Louisiana that's notorious for physical and sexual abuse of detainees.
Jeez. Wow.
Yeah. And so the government said they were beginning the process of deporting him.
But he's a legal permanent resident, so wouldn't he be safe from deportation?
Listen, that's what I thought. But it turns out green card holders can actually be deported for committing certain kinds of crimes.
But Khalil wasn't charged with anything.
He wasn't. And in their statements, administration officials have been clear that he was not arrested for committing a crime.
So this was all seemingly motivated by a dislike for what Khalil was protesting?
Yeah, it seems like it. And after his arrest, the White House posted this image of Mahmoud Khalil on its socials, with text that read, "Shalom Mahmoud." And it kind of looked like a mugshot. And since then, we know that another Columbia student has been arrested and detained by ICE. And then there was a third student ICE was looking for, but before they could find her, she just willingly bounced, left the country, went to Canada. And so on this episode, why one legal scholar says Mahmoud Khalil's arrest should really worry all of us, and how students at Columbia feel in the wake of this latest turn of events.
Take it away, Gene.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Betterment, the automated investing and savings app. CEO Sarah Levy shares why they provide tools and technology for retail investors, small businesses, and independent investment advisors.
At Betterment, there is one unifying idea, which is the idea of expanding access. Historically, great financial advice was reserved for the wealthy, and what technology has done is basically lowered the barrier to entry and created an on-ramp for people earlier in their financial journey to get access to great advice. The same is true for small businesses, where mid and small-sized businesses have not historically been able to afford a retirement solution for their employees. So again, Betterment's technology allows smaller and smaller companies to attract the best employees. And then lastly, for financial advisors, what we've done again is expanded access by automating and using the scale that technology can provide.
Learn more at Betterment.com. Investing involves risk. Performance not guaranteed. This message comes from Bombas. Their slippers are designed with cushioning, so every step feels marshmallowy soft. Plus, for every item purchased, Bombas donates to someone in need. Go to bombas.com/NPR and use code NPR for 20% off your first order.
So one of the questions that we and a lot of folks had, frankly, as news of Mahmoud Khalil's arrest made the rounds was, can the government even do this? And so we decided to call up a legal scholar to talk through a lot of the issues at play.
So I'm Steve Vladeck. I'm a law professor at Georgetown University, and I write a newsletter about the Supreme Court called One First.
Mahmoud Khalil has a green card, so he is a legal permanent resident. And so the assumption a lot of people make, I know this is the assumption I made, was that green card holders are safe from deportation.
If you are a green card holder, if you are a lawful permanent resident, the long-term understanding has been you have constitutional rights that are approaching those of U.S. citizens, and indeed in many cases that are the same as U.S. citizens. The one place where that hasn't been true historically is when it comes to removal. And, even someone with a green card who commits a particular type of crime subjects themselves to being removed from the country. The green card is not a defense. Based on what the federal government and Khalil's lawyers have told the district court in New York, overnight Saturday night, Khalil was transferred first from a detention center in Manhattan to Elizabeth, New Jersey, and then sometime later on Sunday to the big immigration detention center in Jena, Louisiana. I think on Wednesday, finally learned, I think, from the federal government what its claimed basis is for doing all of this, which is this very obscure provision of federal immigration law that allows the Secretary of State to order the removal of an individual, even someone like Khalil who has a green card, if the Secretary of State determines that their continued presence in the country represents a threat, jeopardizes the foreign policy interests of the United States.
Before this case, had you ever heard of this provision being invoked before?
No. I mean, there's exactly one reported example of this provision being used. My understanding is that maybe it's been used a grand total of, somewhere between 2 and 4 times in the 73 years it's been on the books.
Wow.
And, one of the questions about this case is, was that always the plan? Or, did the administration scramble basically to retcon onto this whole affair a justification it came up with only after the fact? I'm not sure we know the answer to that yet.
So you said that, to your knowledge, this obscure provision has only been invoked a few times in 7 decades. Do you know anything about the other instances in which the federal government made this argument?
So, there's one reported case from the 1990s, which really was not nearly as sensational a case. It was a more conventional case where the individual in question wasn't actually a green card holder. So it really didn't provoke quite the same headlines, where you didn't have the sensational, nighttime arrest of a green card holder outside his apartment. And one of the ironies of that case from the 1990s is that the one court to consider this provision, the federal district court in New Jersey, held that it was unconstitutional because it was vague, where the average person on the street wouldn't know what conduct they would engage in to run afoul of this provision, arbitrary, and otherwise inconsistent with the separation of powers. That judge was Judge Marianne Trump Barry, the president's older sister.
What? Wow.
And that case didn't set much of a precedent because on appeal, the federal appeals court in Philadelphia vacated that ruling on a procedural technicality in an opinion by then Circuit Judge Samuel Alito, just to make the weird coincidences go full circle.
Oh my God.
But the larger point is that there's no history of the government using this provision, and that's not an accident. I mean, it's because it raises serious questions about the First Amendment, serious questions about the Fifth Amendment. If someone who is here lawfully, someone who has a green card, someone who has, at least not been charged with any criminal activity, can be removed from the country, can be arrested pending that removal, just because the Secretary of State says so. That seems, at least, profoundly un-American, and is part of why I think this case has been so jarring to everyone.
To the point about First Amendment protections, even people like Ann Coulter, the conservative pundit / provocateur, tweeted, and I'm going to quote her tweet here, "There's almost no one I don't want to deport, but unless they've committed a crime, isn't this a violation of the First Amendment?" End quote. So does Ann Coulter have a point here? Is this unconstitutional?
The substance of the litigation arising out of Khalil's case, I think, is almost entirely going to turn on whether the statute is unconstitutional, whether on its face or at least as applied to him. Is there constitutionally protected speech? Is a provision that lets the Secretary of State just point at somebody and say, "I'm removing you from the country because, reasons," a violation of Fifth Amendment understandings of due process? That's going to be really where I think the litigation rubber hits the road. And it's why this is such an important precedent, because, if the government can do this to Khalil, there's no non-citizen to whom they can't do this. And that's why I think it's so important to watch how those constitutional questions get litigated.
So, Steve, does the government have a case here?
So I think the first thing to say is these are early days, and it's terrifying for Khalil and for his pregnant wife that he's been in immigration detention since Saturday night. I hate to say this, it's not uncommon for immigration officials to arrest people off the street at their jobs, in their regular lives, in contexts in which it's not immediately obvious why those folks are removable. The real answer to does the government have a case turns on whether the Constitution is a shield against this kind of action by the government. And because this provision really has almost never been used, we just don't have case law that answers that question. I have to hope that the answer is yes, but I also have to be, accurate in saying, but we don't know for sure.
So President Trump has made clear that Khalil's is not a special case, and that the Department of Homeland Security has asked Columbia to, name other students that have, in their description, engaged in pro-Hamas activity. What do you think this means for other green card holders like Khalil, for international students, or even just American citizens who were in any way involved with the pro-Palestine protest movement on campus and off campus?
I think there's no question that part of what the White House is trying to do here is to chill the speech of these folks, whether it's citizens or non-citizens, whether it's students or non-students. And, that's perhaps the part of this that's the most offensive to our traditional First Amendment values. I think this case is a test case, whether by design or by accident, and we may not know that for some time, but it's a test case for the proposition of whether just being loosely affiliated with pro-Hamas protests, or at least with protests where one of the many arguments, one of the undercurrents is support for some of Hamas's activities, whether that really is enough. If you're a non-citizen, to subject you to removal. It's not realistic for the Secretary of State to make the individualized determinations that are required to have this, obscure offensive provision apply to more than a handful of people, but it might just take a handful to scare, enough other folks into submission. And that's why I think folks have reacted the way they have to this case. I mean, it's not that the government has no authority to arrest people who might be removable. It's that I think we are all chafing at the idea that someone could be removable just because the Secretary of State makes this, completely self-serving determination based on, at least to all accounts thus far, conduct that's protected by the First Amendment.
Huh. I just want to read you something that the president posted on Truth Social. Quote, following my previously signed executive orders, ICE proudly apprehended and detained Mahmoud Khalil, a radical foreign pro-Hamas student on the campus of Columbia University. This is the first arrest of many to come. We know there are more students at Columbia and other universities across the country who have engaged in pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic, anti-American activity, and the Trump administration will not tolerate it, end quote. What does it mean that the Trump administration is conflating pro-terrorists with anti-Semitic and anti-American and pro-Palestine?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it means is we're blurring the exact lines that are supposed to differentiate what the government's allowed to do from what it's not allowed to do. It is not illegal to be anti-American in the sense of criticizing the policies of the current government. It's not illegal to be pro-Palestinian. I hate to say this, it's not even illegal to be pro-Hamas if all you're doing is, engaging in speech, right? And so part of the problem here is that we have a president who, whether, willfully or just carelessly, is blurring what historically has been critical legal distinctions between conduct, the likes of which can render you subject to criminal prosecution, and if you're a non-citizen, removal from the country, and speech, which historically has been protected, indeed sacrosanct. And, there are a lot of folks online who say, well, Khalil wasn't just speaking, he was engaged in all this other stuff. If there's, an evidentiary basis for saying that he was doing more than just, engaging in constitutionally protected speech, the government is free to provide it. They haven't yet.
So you're saying that, it's not illegal to be anti-American or even pro-Hamas. And so far, the federal government's or the White House's posture is directed at pro-Palestinian protesters. But a lot of people are worried that other protest movements like Black Lives Matter could be next. Do you see other protests potentially being labeled this way?
Yeah, I mean, Black Lives Matter. Think about some of the protests we're starting to see at Tesla dealerships. Not hard to imagine people in the White House trying to connect opposition to Elon Musk's companies with opposition to the administration.
I think President Trump made that link pretty explicitly the other day, right? He said that,
and that's why this case matters. I mean, this case matters, of course, in the immediate instance for Khalil, for his wife, for their family, for their friends. But this case matters to all of us, even those of us who are citizens, because the government's effort to remove a green card holder with no specific claim that he committed a crime, with no specific claim that he did anything other than activity that the Secretary of State has decided, by himself, is inconsistent with America's foreign policy interests. I mean, that approach, no matter what you think of Khalil, no matter what you think of Hamas, is just such a terrifying precedent in an era in which there are so many efforts coming out of this government to intimidate, to chill, to suppress those who would push back against what it's doing. And, one does not have to have any sympathy for Hamas, for Khalil, even for Palestinians, although I do, to believe that this is an incredibly slippery slope to go down, and that at the bottom of it is a really, really dangerous body of law, not just for green card holders, but for everyone.
Can I ask you, just like legally, procedure-wise, what happens now?
So, the first question is whether this case can even go forward in New York. That's what the lawyers would call the jurisdictional question. So there's going to be some maneuvering about like which court even hears this case.
Right.
Then I think the government's going to argue that Khalil's lawsuit is premature, that he actually has to go through the full immigration process before he can challenge it in court. And if that's how this goes, then it's going to be a couple months, maybe even 6 to 8 months before this case gets to the federal appeals court in New Orleans, right, which would be the one with jurisdiction. and then maybe even a year before it gets to the Supreme Court. So, this could take a while, and Khalil could be in immigration detention the whole time.
Jesus. Okay. And so in the interim, his family just has to, this all just has to play out, right?
I mean, immigration detention sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, just like part of the problem here is that I think folks don't, or at least without the visuals of a case like this, folks don't fully appreciate how broad the government's authority is and how how prone to abuse it can be.
Steve Vladeck is a professor of law at the Georgetown University Law Center. He's also the author of The Shadow Docket, How the Supreme Court Uses Stealth Rulings to Amass Power and Undermine the Republic. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you.
We reached out to both the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security for comment, and we did not hear back. But coming up, we head to Columbia University, where students there are trying to make sense of what's going on and worried about what comes next.
Because Mahmoud Khalil was a green card holder, it's not just visa students, it's not just international students. I think it's rattled even American citizens who are like, wait, can I be next?
Stay with us.
This message comes from Betterment. When investing your money starts to feel like a second job, Betterment steps in with a little work-life balance. Their automated investing and savings app handles your money, constantly being diversified and optimized so you can focus on what matters most. Because your money doesn't need a work-life balance, you do. Make your money hustle with Betterment. Get started at Betterment.com. Investing involves risk. Performance not guaranteed.
This message comes from BetterHelp. Therapy can be expensive, but at BetterHelp, they believe therapy should feel accessible, not like a luxury, which is why they offer quality care at a price that makes sense and can help you with anything from anxiety to everyday stress. Your mental health is worth it, and now it's within reach. Visit BetterHelp.com/NPR to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/NPR.
This message comes from Thuma. Create your oasis with Thuma, a modern design company that specializes in furniture and home goods. By stripping away everything but the essential, Thuma makes elevated beds with premium materials and intentional details. With clean lines, subtle curves, and minimalist style, the Thuma bed collection is available in 4 signature finishes to match any design aesthetic. To get $100 towards your first bed purchase, go to thuma.co/NPR.
Gene, just Gene for this part, code switch. We've been talking about the arrest and detention of a former Columbia University student. And Columbia, of course, is one of the richest universities in the country. Its endowment is in the ballpark of $14 billion. And Columbia is at the center of a bunch of overlapping controversies right now. Fights over Israel's war on Gaza and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And now what is shaping up to be a very heated battle over the future of the First Amendment. And so we wanted to get a sense of how students there are dealing with all the stuff swirling around them. Stuff like worries that plainclothes ICE agents are on campus to concerns from supporters of Israel that they feel unsafe. So we hit up a student journalist there.
My name is Claudia Steinhardt. I am a student at the Columbia Journalism School in the Master of Arts program.
Claudia is also an international student. She's from Denmark. And she told us a bit about what she's seeing on her locked down Ivy League campus.
The first time I ever went to Columbia was in 2023. I was visiting a good friend of mine at the journalism school, and you walk in through this big iron gate at the time that was open, and you walk through this boulevard of trees, and then you get into this massive main lawn. Yeah, you could walk in and sit on the grass. You could sit on the steps and have your coffee and watch that campus life unfold. And flash forward to when I was here the first time after being accepted this fall. I come to these iron gates that are now closed. And in front of them, there are little houses for the guards. So that whole idea of that open New York City-based big lawn campus where you could walk in and out, that looked a lot different.
So where were you, Claudia, when you heard about Mahmoud Khalil, who was a Columbia student up until very recently, and his arrest by ICE?
It was my birthday on Saturday, actually, and it started popping up in my WhatsApp chat that people were sharing these press releases that came from Khalil's family, I think, the first ones. And I didn't actually know about him personally before.
Gotcha. And so you went out to talk to some of your fellow Columbia students about what it's feeling like right now on campus. What did the people you spoke to have to say about how the campus feels now as compared to, this time last year when student protests were at their height and getting a lot of attention?
Well, there were several really interesting things I found that people said. One thing was that last year was very contentious, right? Whenever there was a protest for one side, you could expect for there to be a counter-protest from the other side. And so there was this constant, very dichotomous conversation going with these two opposing groups. But now there's a sense that just the other day, there was a protest by Jewish students who were protesting ICE presence. These were mainly Jewish students who had left-leaning pro-Palestine politics. But that was a fairly small protest, and there were no counter voices. And so there's a sort of a feeling that maybe that contention has changed a little bit because we're beyond the conversation that we're having last year. Like now we're in a national conversation, a conversation about citizen rights, and everyone is feeling less safe. And that sort of has taken the conversation into new territory. This is a different and more, maybe perhaps to some at least, more complex conversation, which could be, I think I heard from a few students, be a bridge sort of feeling, maybe I'm going a little bit too far, but a slight sense of community or unity behind that, because everyone is facing that issue.
Right. So you're saying that there might be a bubbling sentiment of they're cracking down on people for people's free speech rights, then all of us could be in jeopardy.
Yeah, I'd say that for sure.
You said that you talked to the leader of that Jewish protest group the other day. Can you tell me about who he is and what he said to you?
Yeah, I spoke to Aharon Dardik. When I was watching the protest, he was leading this, I almost want to call it a sermon. He was really emotional and enraged. He's making these claims or connecting what's going on with ICE on campus right now to Jewish history, to prosecution of Jews in Europe. He spoke to me about that personally too. He talked about how conflicting it was for him.
I'm a Jewish student. My politics are more to the left, and I have a lot of friends who are from sort of all political points, and there were definitely points over the course of last year where I understand why Zionist friends of mine felt unsafe because of the way that the rhetoric of the protests was happening.
So what did he have to say about Trump's new task force to combat anti-Semitism that was launched?
I think Aharon felt like the narratives about anti-Semitism are being used in ways that he doesn't resonate with. He doesn't feel like it's trying to protect him, but maybe even the opposite.
The attempt to use Jews as a scapegoat and hide why they're doing what they're actually doing, which is that the recently inaugurated fascist administration wants to deport people and hates free speech and wants to get rid of people who disagree with them, has never been clearer to me.
The White House press secretary recently said that the Department of Homeland Security has given Columbia a list of names of students that they see as having taken part in what they say are, quote, pro-Hamas activities. Columbia says it would not help Homeland Security identify those people on campus. So how does it feel on campus right now?
Columbia University remains pretty adamant that they're not going to cooperate with this. But I think most students have a very strong feeling that there's only so much that this university can do. And also, there was a really big cut to the university's funding leading up to this detainment.
Yeah, the Trump administration recently canceled $400 million in federal grants and contracts to Columbia University. And they said it was over the school's failure to police anti-Semitism on campus.
So I don't think anyone is naive enough to think that the universities can do exactly as they please. Like, they're in a really difficult position. And that leaves, of course, a lot of insecurity and a lot of I think a lot of students are wishing that the university administration could be more transparent with what steps they're taking.
I think the general sentiment is that we've been hearing hollow statements, and that just does not feel assuring in any way. Like, we've been asking to so many people, what are our protections? What are our protections? And the answer just in so many words is nothing.
I spoke to a lot of other international students on campus.
I'm Shubhanjana. I am an MS full-time student at Columbia Journalism School. I'm from India.
Okay, thank you. Let's just start. Like, how are you feeling these days after everything that's happened with Mahmoud Khalil?
So of course I'm more aware. I'm always looking over my shoulder. I'm like, because it creeps into you. And because Mahmoud Khalil was a green card holder, it's not just visa students, it's not just international students. I think it's rattled even American citizens who are like, wait, can I be next?
So, like you said, you are an international student in the journalism school, and there was a report in the New York Times about this really intense meeting between some administrators at Columbia and students at the J School. And one of the faculty members said to students who were not U.S. citizens, students like you, that they should avoid reporting on Gaza, on Ukraine, and protest around Mahmoud Khalil's arrest. And then the head of the journalism school, according to the Times, seconded that and said, "Nobody can protect you. These are dangerous times." End quote. Are you, Claudia, worried about whether you might face consequences from immigration authorities for reporting on this stuff?
I think, first of all, it's important to say that that meeting was it was a private context, and some of those quotes are taken out of context from a 1.5 hour long meeting where I think everyone appreciated the candor coming from the faculty about the gravity of the situation. But in terms of my own reporting, yes, that is absolutely something that I am aware of. I haven't covered the protest as a journalist. I have written about Israel, and I'm very interested in these matters. But I'm also now, at least, treading carefully and knowing that if I put myself at risk, I protect myself. Because I can't expect, at this point, you can expect so little of the rights that you thought were certain before. And I'm new to this country. I've been here, 6 months? It's hard for me to feel confident in exactly what I can and cannot do, and to know exactly what rights I have and I don't have in the first place. And now that I know that a green card holder can be detained, and it's intransparent, we don't know for what reasons, that makes me have to take a double take on everything I do. And as a journalist, especially, because it's going to have my name on it and it's going to be written in my voice. And if I want to build a career in the US, if I want to stay beyond my student visa, these are just new and very serious concerns that I cannot avoid having. And I'm from Europe, I'm from Denmark, I come from a very privileged position. I'm not the one that's most at risk here. I have student colleagues who are Arabs and Muslims and who have covered these topics, and I don't think there's any denying that they are much more at risk.
If this were going down before you decided on coming to Columbia and the United States for a journalism degree, would you have decided to still come to Columbia?
I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine about this yesterday. We applied, or we got our acceptance letter right when the encampments began. And we were watching it from afar, and we also watched the university crack down on it, the police coming in. Like, we knew about the contentiousness on campus. And so we can't, like, the batch before us or the undergrads who applied in completely different circumstances, they can maybe say that they were really surprised. But we are just not, I mean, I knew that going in. If I'd known that there would be ICE or federal agents in university buildings singling out students for their activism, for their use of their First Amendment, I'm not sure that I would have thought that was a great place to practice journalism. Mm-hmm. It's also, I can't help but think that this is a site of a much larger issue in this country. And I think, I don't know. I think it's bringing up questions about whether, like, I've always wanted to live in the US, and I really dreamt about coming here for a long time. And now it feels like the roof is coming in, you know? Like, I've recognized some of these political issues from back home in Europe and Denmark, where we've had really, really tight immigration policies for years and years, and it's been very ugly to witness. And I think I had an expectation that it wouldn't happen here. And that's kind of what I loved about the country. I feel a little bit like I've lost my sense of direction, and also like I'm standing in the eye of a storm I can't really grasp. And then I feel very distraught about what I can do about it. Because it seems like from now on, it's about sort of keeping your head down and trying not to put yourself at risk. But as a journalist, you probably know this, it makes you want to do the opposite. It just does not feel right. Like all those conversations we've had about journalism these past 6 months, about how important it is for democracy and like to feel like we're changing the world and making it better. And then now it's like, okay, well now the world is changing beyond that. So you might just want to stay quiet for a little bit.
We reached out to officials in the Trump administration, and a State Department spokesperson told us, we do not comment on pending or ongoing litigation. We also reached out to Columbia University for comment, and we didn't hear back. But the faculty of the Columbia University Journalism School released a public statement that read, in part, quote, "The Columbia Journalism School stands in defense of First Amendment principles of free speech and free press across the political spectrum." They went on to say, quote, "All who believe in these freedoms should steadfastly oppose the intimidation, harassment, and detention of individuals on the basis of their speech or their journalism," end quote. As for us on Code Switch, we are going to stay on this story. We're going to keep following it because it has implications for all of us. And that is our show. You can follow us on Instagram at NPR Code Switch. If email is more your thing, ours is codeswitch@npr.org. And subscribe to the podcast on the NPR app or, wherever it is you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the Code Switch newsletter by going to npr.org/Code Switch newsletter.
Just a reminder that signing up for Code Switch Plus is a great way to support our show and public media. And you'll get to listen to every episode sponsor-free. So please go find out more at plus.npr.org/Code Switch. This episode was produced by Xavier Lopez. It was edited by Courtney Stein. Our engineers were Gilly Moon and Patrick Murray.
And we'd be remiss if we did not shout out the rest of the Code Switch Massive. That's Christina Kala, Jess Kung, Leah Danella, Dahlia Mortada, and Verlin Williams. And special thanks to Claudia Steenhard and to Code Switch alums Diba Mohtasham and Tanvi Misra. As for me, I'm Gene Demby.
I'm B.A. Parker.
Be easy, y'all.
Hydrate.
This message comes from NPR sponsor 1Password. Protect your digital life with 1Password. If you're tired of family members constantly texting you for the passwords to streaming services, 1Password lets you securely share or remove access to logins. Access from any device, anytime. 1Password lets you securely switch between iPhone, Android, Mac, and PC with convenient features like autofill for quick sign-ins. Right now, get a free 2-week trial for you and your family at 1password.com/NPR.
This message comes from eBay. Swapping out your tires? There's nothing like it. With eBay, you find the feel you're looking for, from smooth highway rides to grip for rough terrain. Get all the tires you need at prices you'll love. eBay. Things people love. This message comes from Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile took what's wrong with wireless and made it right. They offer premium wireless plans for less, and all plans include high-speed data, unlimited talk and text, and nationwide coverage. See for yourself at mintmobile.com/switch.